We've done segments on the front end of underwriting a loan for an investment, but never one on what happens in our role as it relates to portfolio management should a borrower not make their interest payments. I'd first like to start by addressing the time frame upon which a borrower has to make their interest payments. This is governed by both state law and company policy. Each state has guidelines to allow a grace period. In the states we lend, the shortest grace period allowable is 10 days. Once all interest payments are received, Ignite Funding processes the interest payments on the 15th of the month or the previous business day should the 15th fall on a weekend. You will receive an electronic correspondence from Ignite Funding detailing all interest payments made that you should anticipate being deposited into your bank account within 2 business days. If interest payments are not received by the 5th of the month, correspondence between Ignite Funding and the borrower will begin. Typically, an electronic communication and telephonic communication ensues between the Director of Underwriting and Portfolio Management and the borrower directly to determine timing of receiving payments or the reason of unforeseen delay in payments. Pat Pastor is the Director of Underwriting and Portfolio Management, and he's joining me today to answer the top 10 questions that investors have when we have a default scenario. We've addressed the first 2, which was interest payments, and at what point we engage the borrower with communication. So let's continue on with the next 8 questions. So, Pat, what is the reason a borrower would not make an interest payment by the 1st of the month? And does that imply there's a problem?
You know, Carrie, there's a multitude of different reasons why a borrower would or wouldn't make an interest payment on the 1st of the month. According to state law, they have a certain amount of time as a grace period. They can pay the interest payments at any point in time during that period, just like you with your home mortgage. They can pay at any point during that grace period without any really negative consequences. So it doesn't mean there's anything wrong or bad with the property as long as they pay before the grace period expires.
Okay. If the conversation implies that you're having with the borrower after the 5th of the month that there may be a cash flow issue, what is your next course of action with that borrower?
Well, we really want to figure out if it is a short-term issue or if it's a long-term systemic problem with the company. If it's going to be something that will carry on from month to month. Assuming it's just a short-term issue, we'll work with the borrower to get that short-term issue resolved. Maybe they're waiting on a big payday because they're closing out on half their properties they're selling. This happens from time to time, and it's not something that we can predict. It's not something we can foresee coming, but it is something that becomes a reality from time to time. Those are the short-term issues that we can resolve and work our way around. The bigger issues are when it's a larger problem that's going to last for a longer period of time. That's when we really need to buckle down and figure out exactly what's going on to ensure we work through a remedy that will be both beneficial for our investors as well as making sure that they will be able to meet their obligations in the long run.
At what point are the investors on the loan informed that there is a situation that requires their attention?
They're going to be notified on the 15th of every month. On the 15th of every month, they will either receive their interest that is due or a communication letting them know why that interest has not been paid. So it'll be on the 15th of every month or the first business day prior to the 15th. What that does is gives Ignite Funding an opportunity to work with the borrower in the case of a default, as well as work with the borrower to process the payments in a timely fashion. Like we talked about, they do have a grace period. Each state's slightly different as to how many days they require, but we have to obey those rules and regulations, so we do allow grace periods.
Okay. What type of action could be taken in the situation of non-payment by a borrower?
Really anything is possible, right? We could work with the borrower to do a forbearance agreement, which would extend the time that they need to make their payment or extend the maturity date of the loan. We could work with them to file a notice of default if we can see that this isn't getting anywhere, that this is going to be a long-term issue, that they have an inability to make their payments or an unwillingness to make their payments. We'll go with a more harsher strategy, which would be a notice of default, enacting the assignment of rents, things of that nature. So it really runs again. There's a multitude of different ways to go, but usually it starts off with just talking things out as far as a forbearance is concerned, or extending the maturity, extending the time frame of when interest payments are due. But it could all the way go down to a notice of default, which is the precursor to foreclosure.
So given that the asset is the collateral to the investment, is it always in the best interest of the investors to proceed with foreclosure immediately? Why or why not?
Definitely not. It's not a one-size-fit-all, right? If it was, we would just do that one strategy all the time and it wouldn't be a big deal. We have one policy in place and that's what would happen. Here, it's more of a game of chess as opposed to checkers. We really need to be cautious of what we do. For example, if a borrower is working to refinance loans, if they are out actively seeking different lenders to pay us off, if we were to file a notice of default, would those lenders still fund their loans? Probably not. So if we were to move too quickly, file a notice of default today on a property that is in default today, that could hurt the investors long term because those lenders are now gone. So you really have to be cognizant of what's going on in the bigger picture and make sure you're not hurting yourself in the long run just to do a short-term goal of filing a notice of default. If you're from the outside looking in, notice of default's number one. You got to get it done. And most instances, that is the correct way to play it, but definitely not in all.
Okay. Why would you delay the foreclosure?
One of the reasons is we just talked about the ability of the borrower to refinance. Another reason that you may want to delay the foreclosure would be to give the borrower just a little bit of extra time to sell the property. We've had instances where we've come all the way down to the foreclosure time frame. We're about to foreclose, but the borrower says, hey, if you don't foreclose here, I can get it sold next week. Well, what do? Do we want to foreclose, pay the transfer tax, pay the cost to establish an LLC? Now the lenders are actually owners of the property, so they have to file K-1 on their taxes, or do we give them that extra week? If it's a borrower that has been playing ball with us, so to speak, during that process, maybe that's something we do. And it's ultimately the decision of the investors to either accept it or decline it, but it is a possibility, definitely, to extend the foreclosure process. It's been done before, and I'm sure it'll be done again.
Yeah. Now, do you continue to work with the borrower, visit the property? Is there a constant communication happening? Is it less frequent as you're going through a foreclosure process, or there's a default?
It sounds like a broken record, but each property or each borrower is unique, but more often than not, we have an increased communication with the borrower. More often than not, we are visiting the sites more often than we otherwise would, and more often than not, we are working with them hand in hand much closer than we otherwise would. The reason for that is now we're kind of on bad terms, right? We can no longer trust what the other person's saying. We need to verify. So if they come and say, hey, we're working on a refinance, I want to know who that lender is. I'm going to call them. I want to know who the title and escrow company is and the contact person, because I'm going to call over there and ensure that things are going on. Luckily for Ignite Funding, we have a tremendous amount of relationships throughout the country that we can call multiple lenders and multiple escrow companies, and they'll talk to us because they know who we are, as opposed to just some random person off the street. So although every property is unique, I would say on all those scenarios that you asked, everything is ramped up or intensified during a forbearance/foreclosure proceedings.
Yeah, I agree with that. Do you continue the communication with investors in this level of detail that we're talking about? And why or why not?
From an investor standpoint, as an investor here at Ignite Funding, and you are as well, I want to know everything that's going on. But I also know that I can't know everything that's going on. There are things that go on with every single property every day that are always changing. And so we have to be, as a team here at Ignite Funding, real understanding of the information that we put out. We want to put out as much information as we can without hurting our ability to perform on the assets with the borrower, and secondly, without potentially causing a conflict of interest with the investors saying, we think the property is going to close at the end of the month. When we say that, a lot of people just hang their hat on it and assume it's going to be done to go. It's going to happen at the end of the month. Well, as you know, with real estate, nothing is ever done until the fat lady sings, and unfortunately that doesn't happen every time it's supposed to. So we need to be a little careful with what or how much information we present, but it's my belief that we need to put out there as much as we can without giving too many specifics until we know they're either the buyer is contractually obligated to perform, or that there are specific stepping stones towards a foreclosure, let's say, where we know that it is going to happen on a specific day. If we can talk in specifics, we will, as opposed to talking about what we think is going to happen or what we can guess will happen. I'm very hesitant to do that because, as you know, things change all the time.
Things change. Well, obviously there's a lot of moving pieces here. So should you have more questions in regards to this, we do encourage you to go to our website under the Investor Relations tab on how to manage defaults, and take the time to read everything that's in there, a lot of which we discussed today. Thank you very much, Pat.
No problem.
And we look forward to working with all of you in the future.